The cult 1978 movie Attack of the Killer Tomatoes spawned a cartoon series which aired on Fox Kids in the early 90s. This game is based on the cartoon and has young hero Chad Finletter trying to prevent the evil Dr. Putrid T. Gangrene from activating his doomsday tomato device and pasting the city. As far as cartoon tie-ins on the NES go, this one is one of the most underrated. While it doesn't do anything massively revolutionary, jumping on enemies' heads is still the way to go. Its impressive animation and music mean it's better than a lot of the lesser licensed fare on the system, and certainly better than the majority of THQ's other NES offerings. Fun fact, the voice of Dr. Gangrene in the cartoon was John Astin, and if you remember, he was Gomez in the Addams Family. Cheers! By the late 1980s, the Australian games market was dominated by the Sega Master System. Eager to get the NES back in the game, Mattel, who distributed the NES in Australia, got Melbourne-based Beam Software to make two Aussie-focused sports games, International Cricket, and this, the first ever console game based on Australian rules football. It was quite a competent effort too. Despite not having the official AFL license, it featured solid controls, large chunky player sprites, and even digitized umpire speech, a rarity on the NES. Mattel's plan worked, as the game topped the charts in Australia. Fun fact, there have been more than a dozen AFL games since Aussie Rules Football, the most recent being 2107's AFL Evolution. Cheers! Notorious for being one of the most frustrating games on the NES, Back to the Future is very loosely based on the hit 1985 movie of the same name. The majority of the game consists of controlling Marty McFly as he wanders through the streets of 1955 Hill Valley, collecting clocks to top up a constantly vanishing photo at the bottom of the screen. If it disappears, his future is erased. It's occasionally split up by basic mini-games where you throw milkshakes at bullies, catch your future mother's love hearts, and collect musical notes. Its odd, frantic music was famously terrible, and it's actually a faithful rendition of the movie's theme song, The Power of Love, sped up to a bizarre degree. Fun fact, the movie screenwriter, Bob Gale, was outraged when LJN showed him the game. During media interviews, he told fans not to buy it. Cheers! Undeterred by the negative reaction to the first Back to the Future game, LJN and Beam Software tried their hand at a follow-up. The second and third movies were shot back-to-back, so it was decided that the NES adaptation would follow suit and incorporate both plots into one game. The majority of the game is based on Back to the Future Part 2, with Marty traveling between 1955, 85, and 2015. It's more of a free-roaming affair than its predecessor, and this time the player has to make their way through a series of interlinked 2D stages, with the aim being to find 30 important objects and return them to their correct time period. It's as convoluted as it sounds, and this, combined with a high difficulty level, mean that most gamers never manage to reach it to the end of Back to the Future Part 2 section. Fun fact, there are some interesting time-based mechanics in the game. If you plant an acorn in 1955, it'll be a tree in 1985 and 2015, letting you reach higher platforms. Cheers! The president has been kidnapped by ninjas. Are you a bad enough dude to rescue the president? A very pertinent question, and one that's eventually answered as you fight your way through 7 stages with such no-nonsense names as the city, the sewer, the forest, and the final level, the factory. The game itself is a side-scrolling 2D beat-em-up in which you can initially perform little more than jumps, punches, and kicks while facing off against a series of oncoming ninja enemies from the evil ninja clan. On occasion, you'll pick up a nunchuck or knife, each of which gives you more powerful attacks. At the end of each stage, you'll take on a tricky boss battle with one of the Dragon Ninja's super warriors. In the UK, the game was published by Ocean Software and renamed Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja. Fun fact, in the original arcade version of Bad Dudes, the president was called President Ronnie and looked like Ronald Reagan. The NES president is unnamed and looks more like George H.W. Bush. Cheers! NES games were not in short supply when it came to baseball, and Bad News Baseball offered its own take on the sport. Originally released in Japan as Fierce Fighting Stadium, it's at least unique in that it's probably the only baseball game in which all the umpires are rabbits, for no given reason. Rather than offering a league system, the aim is instead to choose one of 12 teams and simply defeat the others one at a time until they're all beaten. There's also a hidden women's version of the game. If player 1 holds down left on the controller and player 2 holds up, resetting the game will replace all 12 male rosters with female ones. Fun fact, when you beat the last team, you get an ending in which your team celebrates. Part of this involves an obese, shirtless fan carrying one player on his shoulders. Cheers! Duke Davis used to be a punk rocker, but has since become the world's coolest martial arts vigilante. Determined to rid the streets of thuggery, he is armed with 15 different attacks, known as force moves, but the player is only given 3 at a time. The moves you get are depending on what level you're on. Bad Street Brawler was developed with the ill-fated Nintendo Power Glove controller in mind, making it a nightmare to control. This, combined with a bizarre range of enemies and some strange dialogue, including "Never trouble trouble until trouble troubles you," have made it an infamous NES game, but not many are in rush to play. Fun fact, Bad Street Brawler has numerous other names. The Commodore 64 version is called Bop and Rumble, while the Amiga port is brilliantly named Street Hassle. Cheers! One of the cult classics of the original NES, Balloon Fight consists of 2 different game types. The first, which is also found in the arcade version, released 2 months prior, has players controlling a little chap with 2 helium balloons attached to him. By pressing the A button or holding down the B button, you can make him flap his arms. This makes him fly into the air. The aim is to defeat every enemy on the screen, each of whom are flying around on balloons of their own, by hitting them from above and popping their balloons, then floating over to them while they're grounded, knocking them off their platform into the water below. The second mode, Balloon Trip, has the player that starts on a platform on the right-hand side of the screen and starts flying to the left, dodging an endless series of spikes and collecting balloons along the way to build their score. Fun fact, according to Sakamoto, Iwata knew the Balloon Fight code inside and out to such a degree that he could make changes to the game within seconds. Cheers! Although Japanese publisher Takara released a number of Famicom games in Japan, only 2, Banana Prince and Over Horizon, made it to the NES, and both were only sold in Germany. Banana Prince is about a young islander who sets out to recover that island's special giant banana from the evil Paprika Dragon. While for the most part, it's a competent yet standard platform game, it does have one interesting feature. By pressing down and B, the prince can plant a beanstalk wherever he wants. As well as climbing it to reach higher platforms, he can also do a special rolling jump off of it. This not only goes further than a normal jump, but also does damage to enemies, Sonic the Hedgehog style. Fun fact, the Japanese version had shops with "Depart" written above the door, as a shorthand for a department store. This was misinterpreted during the translation, so German version says adieu, French for goodbye. Cheers! One of the first attempts to fully recreate a real-life golf course, Bandai Golf offers all 18 holes of the famous Pebble Beach golf links in California. Many of the elements of the real-life course are featured here. The hole layouts are relatively accurate, and its infamous strong ocean winds are present and accounted for. While it's notable for letting the player choose their own handicap, something rarely seen in a golf game even today, its high level of difficulty and its inaccurate aiming mechanic mean it can be a frustrating game to master. There are better golf games on the NES, but Bandai Golf should at least get praise for its attempt at authenticity. Fun fact, the real-life Pebble Beach is one of the most expensive public golf courses in the world. A single round costs $525. Cheers! This turn-based strategy game is based on 14th century book Water Margin, one of the 4 great classic novels of Chinese literature. It's set during the Song dynasty, where Imperial Minister Gao Qiu has overthrown Emperor Huzong to become the new ruler. Under Gao Qiu's rule, good men are exiled while evil men are given power. Playing as one of these exiled heroes, it's up to you to build and command an army of troops and attempt to stop Gao Qiu. As its 58-page manual makes clear, this is not a simple game, but while its complex battles needed some time to get used to, the game was well received by those who stuck with it. Fun fact, although Gao Qiu is the main villain in both this game and the book, he is said to be loyal to Emperor Huzong. Cheers! In an attempt to get more girls to play video games, this was over 30 years ago, remember, High-Tech Expressions released this platformer based on the world's most popular doll. The entire game is set inside Barbie's dream, in which she searches for a ball gown, pearl ring, and high heels to wear to a fantasy ball. While games aimed at girls have mostly been patronizing and shoddy over the years, Barbie is far from the worst offender. Despite having one of the largest player sprites you'll ever see in a game, it's actually an acceptable enough platformer, even if its bosses are a bit odd. This is the only game where you'll face off against a floating jersey that throws shoes at you. Fun fact, the first of the game's 3 main worlds is called Mall World, because of course, it's a mall. Cheers! The once prosperous town of Skara Brae has been transformed by the evil sorcerer Mangar into a world of winter, with monsters lurking around every corner. Most townsfolk have abandoned Skara Brae, but 6 brave villagers have decided to fight by rescuing the imprisoned wizard, Kyleran, and enlisting his help to kill Mangar. The Bard's Tale is a dungeon crawl game, much like many RPGs of the time, in which the player makes their way through a series of maze-like dungeons while taking part in random battles and leveling up. The problem is, it was originally released in 1985, meaning by the time it was ported to the NES, 6 years later, it was considered primitive by RPG standards. Fun fact, The Bard's Tale spawned 7 sequels and spin-offs over the years. The latest game, The Bard's Tale 4, Barrows Deep, was released in 2018. Cheers! One of the best games designed for the Zapper light gun, this was based on Barker Bill's Cartoon Show, a TV program aired in the US in the 1950s. It consists of 4 different minigames. In Balloon Saloon, players have to shoot balloons as they float away. In Flying Saucers, they must shoot plates being thrown across the screen by Barker Bill and his assistant, Trixie. Window Panes has players shooting through open windows to hit the falling objects behind them, while Fun Follies mixes all 3 and throws in the occasional bonus stages where you shoot coins, eggs, and tomatoes. Given the age of the show it was based on, many young gamers mistook Barker Bill for Mario. Fun fact, the Balloon Saloon minigame features a cameo by the dog from Duck Hunt. He pops up from time to time and you have to avoid shooting him. Cheers! Konami's way of standing out in the sea of NES baseball games was a baseball game where all the players are robots. Robots that fight each other. There are 4 types in the game: cyborgs, tanks, flybots, and motorcycles. And any time there's a close force out or put out, rather than the game simply deciding whether the runner is safe or out, the action switches to a fight where the winner gets the call in their favor. Each robot has a set number of hit points, and if a robot loses all their points in fights, it'll explode. If 3 robots on a team explode, that team loses by default. This means you can focus on fighting and can win without even playing any baseball. Fun fact, this was the first and last game in Konami's Cyber Stadium series, so anyone hoping for a robot badminton game should stop waiting. Cheers! Tokyo Studio Culture Brain's take on baseball included 12 normal teams and 6 Ultra League teams. The Ultra League teams have the ability to perform Ultra Plays, a series of 25 special moves that can change the course of the game. For example, pitchers can throw a phantom ball, which disappears, or an iron ball, which batters can pull off a meteor hit, which causes their bat to shatter into fragments that knock out fielders and stop them from catching the ball. As well as the Ultra Play mechanic, the game also has a full edit suite, which lets players edit the team and player names, stats, and Ultra Plays, if applicable, for any of the 18 teams. Fun fact, Baseball Simulator 1000 was popular enough to spawn no fewer than 5 SNES sequels, only one of which made it outside of Japan. Cheers! It stands to reason that the first baseball game released on the NES was one made by Nintendo itself. Because of its age, it originally launched in 1983, just a few months after the Famicom hit Japan. It's also one of the most basic baseball games on the system, though it's still fun to play. With only 6 teams to choose from and basic pitching and batting controls, it takes barely any time to get used to, meaning entertaining 2-player matches can be found almost right away. As one of the 18 games that released alongside the NES when Nintendo ran its test launch in Manhattan, baseball was one of the key games in establishing Nintendo's new system and convincing the general public losing interest in the video game fad that this wasn't another Atari imitator. Fun fact, the character and game design for baseball were led by none other than Miyamoto, who personally really wanted there to be a baseball game on the Famicom. Cheers! Another baseball game, another interesting gimmick. SNK's Baseball Stars introduces a sort of RPG element to the proceedings. The better you play, the more money you earn, and this money can be spent to upgrade player stats or buy new ones for your roster. This aside, Baseball Stars packs a number of other firsts, as well as being the first sports game with a battery backup, letting you save to the cartridge instead of using a password. It was also the first to let players create new teams and players on top of the 8 pre-existing ones. Meanwhile, though it doesn't have officially licensed players, one team has a suspiciously familiar roster, including Babe, Hank, and Willie. Fun fact, the highest possible score in the game is 1858 to 1854. This is because the game ends immediately if a team is leading by 100 runs after a half inning or 10 after an inning. Cheers! Baseball Stars was a big success in America and Canada, and so a few years later, SNK released a sequel in the arcades. By this time, SNK was focused on its own Neo Geo console, so while an NES port was still developed, publishing duties were instead taken over by California company Romstar. Unfortunately, despite being a sequel, Baseball Stars 2 isn't known for what it added to the original, but what it removed. Female players were no longer in the game, and the ability to edit custom teams and players was also no more. Add to this fact that the RPG system was more of a grind than before, upgrades cost far more money, and the result was a disappointing follow-up. Fun fact, despite its name, this is actually the third Baseball Stars game. The second, Baseball Stars Professional, was only released on arcades and Neo Geo. Cheers! Despite being one of the earlier baseball games on the NES, Bases Loaded was packed with features that were considered somewhat ahead of their time. Players can take on a 132-game season with a password given after each game, which was a rarity in 80s sports games, while occasional voice clips and jumbotron shots, where little animations played out on the big screen, add to the atmosphere. The only truly divisive feature is, however, the most important. Rather than the usual behind-the-batter viewpoint most baseball games had, Bases Loaded instead places the camera behind the pitcher. While this makes the game look a lot more like a TV broadcast, it makes batting significantly trickier. Fun fact, each team in Bases Loaded has a specific batter who will charge the mound or try to fight the pitcher if you hit him with the ball. Cheers! The second Bases Loaded game adds a couple of new features to keep things fresh for fans of the original. The season mode is now 130 games long, but ends with a World Series match against either LA or New York, depending on what league your team is from. The ability to choose your starting lineup from each match has been added, along with player form. Players go through streaks and slumps like real major leaguers, according to the manual. The fictional rosters have completely changed too. Now all the Washington players are named after politicians, like Nixon, Reagan, and Bush, while the LA squad shares its name with Hollywood stars, like Cruz and Pacino. Fun fact, Bases Loaded 2 got a novelization in the early 90s as a part of the Worlds of Power, a 9-book series of stories from video games like Metal Gear and Mega Man 2. Cheers! Sometimes when you try to shake things up a bit, you can annoy a lot of fans. This was the case with Bases Loaded 3, which completely axed the popular 130-game season mode and replaced it with a single challenge, play a perfect game. As well as the normal score, you also start with a rating of 100, and every time you make a mistake, throw to an unmanned base, strike out, etc., points are deducted. The aim then is to not only beat the CPU opponent, but to also try to keep a rating of 100 by the end. While it was a novel idea, fans hated the scrapping of the season mode, and Bases Loaded 3 was criticized as a result. Fun fact, the cover star was Chicago Cubs second baseman Ryan Sandberg, even though the lack of a license meant neither he nor any other MLB player was actually in the game. Cheers! It's a lesson well and truly learned. Jellicoe ditched its perfect game gimmick and brought back the season mode for its final NES Bases Loaded game. Once again, players are able to play through a 130-game season, culminating in a Super Series finale. And once again, the starting lineup can be changed at will. One new feature does make its debut in the form of the star system. As players make great plays and mess up, they get white and black stars assigned to their name. These affect performance, and so the player has to decide whether to bench players who are on the slump or try to build their form up again. A happy ending for the series on the NES. Fun fact, the Bases Loaded games were part of a series of sports games called Mareo in Japan. Other entries made it to the West as Goal, Hoops, and Racket Attack. Cheers! Tim Burton's 1989 Batman movie was such a box office smash that it led to a number of video game adaptations. While Ocean Software got the rights to make Batman games for home computers, like the Amiga and Commodore 64, the console rights instead went to Japanese studio Sunsoft. The NES rendition, thought by many to be the best of the bunch, is an action platformer in which Batman makes his way through 5 difficult levels in order to reach the Joker for a showdown atop Gotham Cathedral's bell tower. Armed with a trio of weapons, the Batarang, the Spear Gun, and the Dirk, a gun that shoots in 3 directions, and able to do wall jumps, Ninja Gaiden style, Batman is a versatile hero to play as, and the game is a treat to play as a result. Fun fact, other DC comic villains who appear as standard enemies in the game include KG Beast, Deadshot, and Maxi Zeus. Cheers! Sunsoft's second Batman game didn't have a film behind it, so instead it looked more like the comic book versions of Batman in the early 90s. In case the title didn't make it obvious, Return of the Joker has the Joker escaping from Arkham Asylum and stealing a bunch of precious metals from Gotham's mines. He plans to use these metals to make explosives, so it's up to Batman to punch him in the head a bit. With larger sprites than its predecessor, Return of the Joker has more of a focus on shooting than hand-to-hand combat, and plays a little more like a Batman version of Mega Man instead, which is obviously no bad thing at all. Fun fact, this was later remade for the Mega Drive as Batman Revenge of the Joker. Speaking of title changes, the NES version is known as Dynamite Batman in Japan. Cheers! By the time the second Batman movie came around, the Batman license was no longer in Sunsoft's hands, with Konami having taken the reins. Its NES adaptation of Batman Returns was a side-scrolling beat-em-up similar to Double Dragon, in which Batman punches his way through 6 stages in an attempt to destroy the Catwoman and the Penguin. In order to keep things interesting, the game features a special racing stages where the player controls the Batmobile and the Batski boat. While Batman only has 1 life bar, the game does let you continue. However, you don't get the true ending, in which Penguin praises you for some reason, unless you beat the game within a certain time without dying. Fun fact, the game's oddest power-up is a test tube. It can only be used once, when you fight Catwoman. It's used automatically and halves her health. Cheers! A port of Interplay's novel take on chess. Instead of the traditional chess pieces, each unit on the board is an actual living character that walks when you move. The rook turns into a large stone monster. The main feature, however, is that when a player captures a piece, the game switches to a cutscene set in a courtyard in which the 2 characters battle each other until yours wins in an inventive way. Limbs are dismembered, heads are smashed, and aforementioned stone monsters are kicked in the groin. While it's a novel way to play chess, many criticize it for being extremely slow, with animations that take an age to finish. Fun fact, Battle Chess spawned 2 non-NES sequels. Battle Chess 2 was based on Chinese chess, while Battle Chess 4000 was set in space. Cheers! Many games over the years have been inspired by The Legend of Zelda, but few have borrowed specifically from Zelda 2. The Battle of Olympus does just that, offering similar side-scrolling action gameplay to Link's second adventure. The story here is set up not in Hyrule though, but in ancient Greece. A young chap called Orpheus has to rescue his girlfriend Helene from Hades, the god of dark world Tartarus. He does this by traveling through 8 lands in search of the gods, each of whom gives him a new weapon or an upgrade. For example, Argus gives you the power to fire shots from your sword, while Poseidon gives you an ocarina. So in a way, maybe it influenced Zelda 2. Fun fact, in Greek mythology, Orpheus was a musician, poet, and prophet who could charm all living things with his music. It's said he died when a group of women tore him to pieces. Cheers! Back in 1980, Atari wowed arcade goers with Battlezone, a 3D vector game in which the player controlled a tank and shot at enemies from first-person perspective. 10 years later, veteran designer Gary Kitchen created Battletank, an NES game that borrows so much from Battlezone that it might as well be considered a spiritual successor. Players are put behind the controls of an M1 Abrams tank, and the aim is to blow up everything. enemy tanks, choppers, nuclear power bases, fuel tanks, and the like, in an attempt to find and rescue a NATO commanding officer who's being held hostage by the unnamed enemy. While Battlezone's influence is clear, Battletank improves on it by giving your tank a variety of weapons, including smokescreen, cannon, and machine gun. Fun fact, Gary Kitchen was better known for creating Keystone Capers and developing A Boy and His Blob alongside David Crane. Cheers! Video game versions of board games are always an interesting concept, because they usually have to be able to offer something extra to justify not buying the real thing. Battleship attempts to do this by including a 40-level player mode, in which the player has to destroy the CPU's ships. There are also different weapons, in which take the game beyond the traditional method of picking a single square and hoping it hits. Missiles, for example, can destroy an entire ship with just one hit. Perhaps the biggest blunder with Battleship, however, is the fact that it sorely lacks multiplayer mode of any kind. It's a random game at the best of times, but playing just the CPU is even less satisfying. Fun fact, one of the tips in the manual is to reset if it looks too bad, essentially teaching children that rage quitting is okay. Cheers!